Welcome to HOA Debrief. This is what selective enforcement looks like. I am calling management right now. That was Laura Brown, blonde bob swinging as she jabbed her phone at my face, standing at the edge of my driveway in a white windbreaker and red visor. She yelled that my fence color was wrong and she could see it from the street, and that was all the proof she needed. Her other hand gripped a stack of orange survey stakes like she was about to plant a flag on conquered territory. I live in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, in a planned community called Pinecrest Village Terrace Association, where every backyard upgrade becomes a committee argument. I am a pool service technician who understands HOA politics, which means I know exactly how much power these people think they have and how little accountability they face. I bought this house 2 years ago, and the back fence was already rotting when I moved in. Sagging posts and split rails that looked like a stiff wind might finish the job. The HOA approved my fence replacement application 3 months ago in writing, and I had the contractor scheduled to start today. Laura is the welcome committee chair, which in this neighborhood means she weaponizes move-in rules and monitors compliance like a private investigator. She showed up 15 minutes after my contractor pulled in with the first load of panels. The fence color is sage green. The HOA guideline packet I received when I submitted the application listed 3 approved fence colors: white, tan, and natural wood stain. Sage green was not on that list, but the application approval letter I got back from management said approved as submitted with no notes or conditions. I pointed that out to Laura, and she said the letter does not matter because the design standards changed last year, and I should have known to check again before ordering materials. I asked her to show me the updated standards, and she said they are not published yet, but the board already voted and sage green is a violation. Her voice got louder with every sentence. I told her I have the signed approval and I am not stopping the job. She said if I proceed, she will file an emergency violation and the board will fine me starting tomorrow, daily, until I tear it down and start over with an approved color. I asked what the approved colors are now, and she said white or tan, same as always, and sage green was never an option. I said the approval letter proves otherwise, and she said the letter was issued in error by a clerk who does not have authority, and the board can revoke it retroactively. That was the first time I realized she was not just being difficult. She was setting up a paper trail to justify fines and forced removal, and she was doing it in real time while my contractor stood there with a drill in his hand. Laura said the board will back me because they are afraid of me. She said it with a smile, like she was letting me in on a secret. She has been on the board for 6 years and runs the design compliance hotline, which means every complaint about paint, landscaping, or structures flows through her phone first. I did not know that when I submitted the application. I know it now because she made sure to tell me while she took photos of my fence panels with her phone, stepping around the post holes my contractor had just augured. My contractor asked if he should keep working. I said yes. Laura said if he drives one more screw, she will have his truck towed for unpermitted commercial vehicle parking in a residential zone. The HOA CC&Rs limit contractor parking to 4 hours and require a 48-hour notice filed with management. I filed the notice last week and I have the email confirmation. But Laura said the notice was not processed because I did not include the contractor license number and the vehicle make and model. I pulled up the email on my phone and showed her the details, all of it right there in the body of the message. She glanced at it and said that is not the correct form, and the parking restriction is still enforceable. She turned to my contractor and said, I am putting you on notice. If you do not move your vehicle within 15 minutes, I will call the tow company we contract with, and you will be cited. The contractor looked at me and I told him to stay. He is a friend of a friend and he has dealt with HOA nonsense before. But he said if they tow his truck, he loses a day of work and the tow fees come out of his pocket. Laura said exactly, so make the smart choice. I said I will pay the tow fees if it comes to that, and I will file a complaint with management for harassment. Laura laughed and said go ahead, management works for the board, and I am the board. She was not technically wrong. The Pinecrest Village Terrace Association contracts with a property management company that handles the paperwork and violations. But the board sets policy, and the board is 3 people. Laura, a guy named Dean who works in commercial real estate and never shows up to meetings, and a retired schoolteacher N. Ahmed Pam who defers to Laura on everything. Laura holds the gavel. I told her I am not tearing down an approved fence because she changed her mind after I already bought the materials. She said I did not change my mind, the rules were always clear, you just did not follow them. I asked her to show me the section of the CC&Rs, or the design standards, that lists the approved fence colors. She said it is in the Architectural Guidelines Addendum, and I can request a copy from management for a $5 processing fee. I said I already have the guidelines, I got them when I bought the house, and sage green is not mentioned anywhere. She said then you have an outdated copy and you are responsible for knowing the current rules. I asked when the rules changed, and she said I do not have the timeline in front of me, but it is enforceable as of today. My contractor left. He said he would come back tomorrow if I can get this sorted out, but he was not going to risk his truck. Laura watched him pull away, and then she turned back to me and said, "You just made this a lot harder on yourself." She said the HOA gave me a cure deadline that expires tonight at midnight, and they threaten daily fines starting tomorrow. $50 a day until I submit a compliant application and remove the non-conforming materials. I said I never received a cure deadline notice, and she said it was mailed last week. Check your mailbox. I went inside and checked the mail from the last 2 weeks. No notice. I came back out and told her, and she said then it is in the system and you will receive it. But ignorance is not a defense. I am trying to sell this house. That is the part I have not mentioned yet, and it is the reason I cannot afford to let this drag out. I accepted an offer 2 weeks ago and we are in escrow, closing in 45 days. The buyer already ordered the appraisal and the title search. If the HOA files a lien or puts a disclosure notice on the property for an unresolved violation, the sale could fall through, or the buyer could demand a price cut to cover the fines and legal fees. I have been planning this move for months because I got a better job offer in Spokane and I cannot keep commuting. Laura does not know any of that, but she is about to find out how motivated I am to win this fight. I called the property management company and got voicemail. I left a message asking for the compliance officer to call me back and confirm the status of my fence application and any alleged cure deadline. Then I called the HOA board president, which is Laura, because the contact sheet lists her cell number for urgent compliance matters. She answered on the second ring and said, "I already told you everything you need to know. Do not call this number unless you are reporting a violation." I said, "I am reporting a violation. You are harassing me and threatening my contractor with towing when I have written approval and filed all the required notices." She said the approval is void and the towing is standard enforcement. I said, "Show me the documentation." She hung up. If you are enjoying this HOA nightmare, please hit subscribe and drop a like so I know to keep making these stories. I spent the rest of the afternoon digging. I am a pool service technician, which means I spend half my time dealing with HOA rules about equipment noise, chemical storage, and contractor access. So I know how to read CC&Rs and I know what public records I can request from the county. I started with the Pinecrest Village Terrace Association covenants filed with the county recorder. The original covenants from 2001 list general architectural standards but no specific fence colors. The First Amendment, recorded in 2008, adds a design review committee, but still no color list. The Second Amendment, recorded in 2015, updates the quorum rules for board meetings but does not touch fences. I found no recorded amendment adding or changing fence color restrictions. That means any fence color rule is internal policy, not a recorded covenant, which means it is enforceable only if it was properly adopted by the board and communicated to homeowners. I checked my closing documents from when I bought the house and found the disclosure packet from the HOA. It included a 3-page architectural guideline sheet dated 2019. Approved fence colors: white, tan, natural wood stain. Sage green is not listed, but neither is any language saying the list is exclusive or that other colors require special approval. The application form I submitted 3 months ago asked for material type, height, and setback. It had a box for color but no drop-down menu and no warning about restricted colors. I wrote sage green in the box. Management approved it. I called the management company again, and this time I got a live person, a woman named Stephanie who handles violation notices and compliance tracking. I explained the situation and she put me on hold for 5 minutes. When she came back, she said the approval letter I received is valid and there is no cure deadline in the system. I asked about the alleged rule change, and she said the board has not submitted any updated architectural guidelines for publication, and the 2019 version is still the current standard. I asked if Laura Brown has the authority to revoke an approval, and she said no. Only the board can vote to revoke an approval, and it requires a noticed hearing. I asked if there is any notice of a hearing, and she said no. I asked Stephanie to email me a confirmation of everything she just told me. She hesitated and then said, I can send you a status summary, but I cannot comment on board member conduct. I said, I am not asking you to comment, I am asking you to confirm what is in your system, which is your job. She said she would send the email, and she did, 15 minutes later. It confirmed no cure deadline, no updated guidelines, and no board vote to revoke my approval. I forwarded that email to Laura with a short message. I have written confirmation from management that my approval is valid and there is no violation. Please confirm you are withdrawing the fine threat. I sent it at 4:47 p.m. Laura responded at 5:02 p.m. She said management does not set policy, the board does, and the board will meet tomorrow night to ratify the emergency violation and the fines. She said I should plan to attend if I want to speak, but the outcome is not in question because the rules are the rules. She said if you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA. That was her catchphrase. The thing she said to every homeowner who pushed back, and I had heard it twice now in the same day. I called my real estate agent and told her what was happening. She said this is a problem. The buyer is going to get a copy of the HOA disclosures during their inspection period, and if there is an active violation or a pending fine, it will show up. She said I needed to resolve it before the buyer found out or the deal would crater. I told her I was working on it and I would have an answer by the end of the week. She said make it sooner. The buyer is already nervous about the HOA fees. That night I drove to the subdivision entrance and looked at the monument sign. Pinecrest Village Terrace Association in raised bronze letters, no readable text on the plaque below, just the little emblem logo. Then I drove through the neighborhood and looked at fences. I counted 43 fences visible from the street. 31 were white or tan. 8 were natural wood stain, weathered gray. 3 were sage green, same shade as my panels. Same style, same height. One of those 3 was 2 streets over from my house, installed sometime in the last year based on how clean the posts looked. I took photos of all 3 sage green fences, close-ups showing the color and the style and the street address numbers on the curbs. I went home and sent another email to Laura, copying the management company and the other 2 board members. I attached the photos and wrote, I found 3 other sage green fences in the neighborhood, all visible from the street. None cited for violations. Please explain the enforcement standard. I sent it at 8:34 p.m. No response that night. The next morning I woke up to a voicemail from Stephanie at management. She said Laura called her after hours and demanded she send me a formal violation notice for unauthorized fence color and unpermitted construction activity. Stephanie said she explained that the approval is valid and there is no violation in the system, but Laura insisted the board has the authority to override staff and issue emergency enforcement. Stephanie said she is required to follow board direction, so she is sending the notice, but she wanted me to know it is not based on a staff finding. The notice arrived by email at 7:15 a.m. It said I was in violation of architectural standards. I had 7 days to cure by removing the non-conforming materials, and if I did not comply, I would be fined $50 per day starting on day 8. The notice was dated yesterday, backdated to the day Laura showed up in my driveway. I called my contractor and told him not to come back yet. He said he had already rescheduled me for next week and he was booked solid, so if I did not sort this out fast, I would have to wait another month. I said I would sort it out. Then I called a friend who works for the city, a clerk in the planning department who handles subdivision plats and easement records. I asked him if he could pull the recorded plat for Pinecrest Village Terrace and check for any easements or setback notes on my lot. He said he could have it by end of day. I also asked him if HOA violation notices and fines are public records. He said no, those are private association matters, but if the HOA files a lien with the county, then the lien is public and I can request a copy. Then I did something Laura was not expecting. I filed a public records request with the county for any complaints, violation notices, or enforcement actions filed against Laura Brown at her home address in Pinecrest Village Terrace Association. Idaho public records law requires government entities to disclose records, but HOAs are private, so they are not subject to the same rules. However, if an HOA files a lien or a lawsuit, that becomes a public court record. I was betting Laura had been on the receiving end of a complaint at some point, and I wanted to see if she had ever been cited for the same behavior she was accusing me of. The records request came back the same day. There were 3 hits. 2 were noise complaints filed by neighbors, both dismissed. The third was a violation notice filed by the HOA in 2018 against Laura Brown for unauthorized fence modification. The notice said she had installed a gate extension and a trellis section without submitting an application, and the color of the modification did not match the approved fence color on file. The notice gave her 30 days to cure. There was a follow-up document showing she submitted a retroactive application and the violation was closed with no fine. The color listed in the application was sage green. That was my trump card. Laura had installed a sage green fence modification in 2018, got cited for it, and got it approved retroactively. Now she was trying to fine me for doing the same thing, except I had submitted my application in advance and got approval up front. I let the meeting move on, because my move was not a speech, it was a document. I was going to hold it until the hearing tomorrow night and drop it only after Laura repeated her claim one last time, on record. That afternoon, my surveyor finally showed up. I had hired him 2 weeks ago to confirm my property line before the fence project started, but he got delayed on another job and did not make it out until now. He spent an hour with his equipment, setting up the transit and hammering in reference stakes. Then he pulled out a tape measure and walked the back line. When he finished, he said my property line is exactly where I thought it was, and the fence plan I submitted is 3 inches inside my line, fully compliant with the setback. He also said there is no easement on my lot, the plat is clean. I asked him to put that in writing and he said he would email me the survey report and a signed boundary certification by tonight. Laura called me at 4:00 p.m. She said the board meeting is tomorrow at 6:00 p.m. at the clubhouse, and I am on the agenda for a violation hearing. She said I could bring any evidence or arguments I wanted, but the board had already reviewed the case and the fine schedule was prepared. I asked if the meeting notice was posted, and she said it was emailed to all homeowners this morning. I checked my email and found nothing. I asked her to forward me the notice, and she said it went to the address on file. If I did not receive it, that is my problem. I asked what address was on file, and she said she did not have access to that information. Contact management. I called Stephanie at management and asked for the meeting notice. She said the board did not submit a meeting notice for publication. Laura told her it was an emergency session and notice was not required. I said that is not how it works. The CC&Rs require 72-hour notice for any meeting where a fine or lien is imposed. Stephanie said she brought that up with Laura, and Laura said the emergency provision overrides the notice rule. I asked Stephanie to send me the section of the CC&Rs that describes the emergency provision. She said she would look it up and get back to me. She called me back 30 minutes later and said there is no emergency provision. The notice rule applies to all meetings. I asked if that means the meeting tomorrow is invalid, and she said she is not an attorney and she cannot give me legal advice. But she is required to follow the governing documents. I emailed Laura and the other 2 board members and copied management. I wrote, "The CC&Rs require 72-hour notice for any meeting imposing fines. Tomorrow's meeting does not meet that requirement and any action taken will be invalid. I am requesting the meeting be postponed and proper notice be provided." I sent it at 5:48 p.m. Laura responded at 6:03 p.m. She said the meeting will proceed as scheduled and my objection is noted. She said if I did not attend, I would forfeit my right to speak and the board would proceed without me. I called an attorney, a guy I knew from a property dispute case a few years ago. I explained the situation and he said HOAs have broad authority but they have to follow their own rules, and if the rules require notice they cannot skip it. He said if they imposed a fine without proper notice I could challenge it in court and probably win, but litigation is expensive and slow. He said the smarter move was to show up at the meeting, put my evidence on the record and force them to back down or expose themselves to liability. He said if they fined me anyway I should pay under protest and then sue for reimbursement and attorney fees. I asked how much that would cost and he said $5,000 to $10,000 depending on how long it dragged out. I said I did not have that kind of money and he said then you need to win at the hearing. The next night I showed up at the clubhouse at 5:45 p.m. The meeting was scheduled for 6:00 p.m. The parking lot was empty except for 3 cars. Laura's white SUV, a sedan I did not recognize, and a compact car that belonged to Pam, the other board member. There was a security guard hovering near the clubhouse door, a guy in a polo shirt with a radio clipped to his belt. He asked if I was here for the meeting and I said yes. He said the meeting is closed session, residents are allowed but no recording devices. I said I did not have a recording device and he waved me in. The clubhouse meeting room was small, maybe 20 feet by 15, with a folding table at the front and 2 rows of chairs facing it. Laura sat at the center of the table with Pam to her right. The 3rd board member, Dean, was not there. Laura said we are waiting for one more person and then we will start. At 6:05 p.m. a man in a suit walked in and sat down at the table next to Laura. She introduced him as the HOA attorney. I had not been told there would be an attorney present. Laura said this is a formal hearing and the board has legal counsel to ensure we follow procedure. I said I was not notified about the attorney and I would like to reschedule so I can bring my own. Laura said this is not a court proceeding, you do not have a right to counsel, and the hearing will proceed. Laura opened the meeting by reading a prepared statement. She said I had violated the architectural standards by installing a non-conforming fence color and proceeding with construction after being notified of the violation. She said the board had reviewed the evidence and determined that the approval letter I received was issued in error and was void. She said the violation was ongoing because the fence panels were still on my property and I had not submitted a compliant application. She said the board was imposing a fine of $50 per day starting today, and if I did not cure the violation within 7 days, the fine would increase to $100 per day. She said the board was also placing a lien on my property for the amount of the fines and any collection costs. I asked to speak. Laura said I would have 5 minutes after the board finished its presentation. The attorney then stood up and said the board had the authority to revoke approvals issued in error and to impose fines for ongoing violations. He said the architectural standards were clear, and the color sage green was not listed as an approved color. He said the board had the discretion to interpret the standards and to enforce them uniformly. He said my application was deficient because I did not include a color sample, and I did not confirm the color against the approved list before ordering materials. He sat down. Laura said I could now speak. I stood up and walked to the table. I put my binder down and opened it to the first tab. I said I had written approval from management and the approval was valid under the governing documents. I showed them the approval letter and the email from Stephanie confirming there was no violation in the system. Laura said management does not set policy, the board does. I said the board did not vote to revoke the approval and there was no noticed hearing before tonight. Laura said this is the hearing. I said the CC&Rs require 72-hour notice and this meeting was called with less than 24 hours. The attorney said the board had the authority to call an emergency meeting when a violation posed a threat to property values or neighborhood aesthetics. I said there is no emergency provision in the CC&Rs. The attorney said the board had inherent authority to protect the association. I said, show me the section. He did not respond. I turned to the second tab in my binder. I said I had photos of 3 other sage green fences in the neighborhood, all visible from the street, none cited for violations. I laid the photos on the table. Laura glanced at them and said those fences were installed before the rule change. I said, what rule change? Show me the recorded amendment or the board resolution. She said the rule change was internal policy and did not require recording. I said then it is not enforceable unless it was properly noticed to homeowners. The attorney said homeowners are responsible for knowing the current standards. I said homeowners are also entitled to equal enforcement, and if you allowed sage green fences in the past, you cannot selectively fine me for the same thing now. Laura said those fences are not the same, they are natural variations of tan. I said they are the same color as my panels, I can show you the manufacturer's spec sheet. She said the board has discretion to interpret color standards. I said discretion is not the same as arbitrary enforcement. I turned to the third tab. I said I also had a public records response showing that Laura Brown was cited in 2018 for installing a sage green fence modification without approval, and the violation was closed after she submitted a retroactive application. I laid the document on the table. The room went silent. Pam leaned forward and read the document. The attorney picked it up and read it. Laura said that is not relevant, that was a different situation. I said it is exactly relevant, you installed a sage green fence, got cited, and got it approved. Now you are trying to fine me for the same color when I submitted my application in advance and got approval. Laura said if you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA. I said you said that already and it did not work the first time. Pam said I think we need to review this. Laura said there is nothing to review, the violation is clear. Pam said if there are other sage green fences and Laura had one approved, we cannot fine him for the same thing, that is selective enforcement. The attorney said the board has discretion. Pam said discretion does not mean we can ignore our own precedent. Laura said we are not ignoring precedent, we are updating the standards. Pam said then we need to update the written standards and give notice, we cannot just enforce a new rule retroactively. I said I have one more thing. I turned to the fourth tab. I said the violation notice I received was backdated to the day Laura showed up in my driveway, but management confirmed the notice was not generated until the next day after Laura called and demanded it. I said that is fabrication of documents and it is evidence of bad faith. I laid the email from Stephanie on the table with the timestamps highlighted. Laura said Stephanie made a mistake. I said Stephanie documented the timeline in writing, and I have her email confirming Laura called after hours and insisted on the backdated notice. The attorney said this is getting off track, the issue is the fence color. I said the issue is selective enforcement, backdated notices, and bad faith. I said I also have a survey report confirming my fence is fully compliant with the setback and there is no easement issue. Laura said no one claimed an easement issue. I said you implied it when you said the fence might encroach, and I am putting the survey on the record to eliminate that argument. I laid the survey report on the table. Pam said I move we table this until we can review the documents and get clarification on the enforcement standard. Laura said we are not tabling anything, the violation is ongoing and the fine starts today. Pam said I am not voting to impose a fine without reviewing the evidence. The attorney said the board needs a majority vote to impose a fine. Laura said we have a majority, Dean gave me his proxy vote. I said proxy votes are not allowed for enforcement hearings under the CC&Rs. The attorney said he would need to review that. I said I already did. It is in Section 4.7. Enforcement actions require a vote by members present at a noticed meeting. Laura said this is a noticed meeting. I said no, it is not. You did not provide 72-hour notice and you did not post the agenda. Pam said, I think he is right. We need to reschedule and do this properly. Laura said, we are not rescheduling. The fine is imposed as of tonight. Pam said, I am not voting for that. Laura said, then I am casting my vote and Dean's proxy vote, and the motion carries. The attorney said, I do not think the proxy vote is valid in this context. Laura turned to him and said, whose side are you on? He said, I am advising the board on procedure, and the procedure here is questionable. Laura stood up and said, the hearing is over, the fine is imposed. You will receive a follow-up notice in writing. I said, if you impose that fine, I will sue the board for selective enforcement, bad faith, and violation of your own governing documents, and I will win. Laura said, good luck with that. I said, I do not need luck. I have the documents, and I am going to email them to every homeowner in this association so they can see how you operate. She said, you would not dare. I said, watch me. I left the clubhouse and sat in my car. I spent 20 minutes formatting the email. I attached the approval letter, the photos of the other sage green fences, the public records response showing Laura's 2018 violation, the email from Stephanie about the backdated notice, and the survey report. I wrote a short summary explaining the situation and the selective enforcement. Then I pulled the homeowner email list from the association website, where it was posted as a contact directory, and I sent the email to every address on the list. I sent it at 7:52 p.m. By 9:00 p.m. I had 15 replies. Most of them were supportive, saying they had dealt with Laura's tactics before and they were glad someone was finally pushing back. 3 people said they had sage green fences and they had never been cited. 2 people said they had been fined for violations that other homeowners got away with, and they were planning to bring it up at the next board meeting. 1 person said she was on the architectural committee and she had never seen any updated fence color standards, and Laura had never submitted a rule change for committee review. The next morning, Stephanie from management called me. She said the board president called her last night and said I was harassing board members and threatening litigation, and Laura wanted management to issue a cease and desist letter. Stephanie said she explained that I had not violated any rules and the email I sent was factual and addressed to homeowners, which is allowed under the CC&Rs. She said Laura insisted, and Stephanie said she would not issue the letter without board authorization from a majority vote. She said Pam called her separately and said she was not voting to issue any letter and she wanted the fence violation matter dropped. Stephanie said as of this morning the violation notice is withdrawn and there are no fines. I asked Stephanie what changed. She said Pam reviewed the documents and decided the enforcement was not supportable. And without Pam's vote, Laura did not have a majority. She said Laura was furious, but there was nothing she could do. I asked if the approval letter was still valid, and Stephanie said yes, the approval stands and I could proceed with the fence installation. I called my contractor and told him to come back. He said he could be there tomorrow morning. The contractor showed up the next morning with a helper and they finished the fence in 2 days. Sage green panels, 6 feet tall, 3 inches inside my property line, exactly as approved. I walked the line with them and checked every post with a level. The fence looked great. Laura drove by twice while they were working, but she did not stop or say anything. On the second day, a neighbor came over and said she loved the color and asked for my contractor's number. I gave it to her. 2 weeks later, the HOA held its regular monthly board meeting. I showed up along with about 30 other homeowners, which was more than had attended a meeting in years. The agenda included a proposal to adopt an enforcement checklist that would require the board to document the basis for any violation notice, compare the alleged violation to similar conditions in the neighborhood, and provide evidence of uniform enforcement before imposing a fine. Pam introduced the proposal and said it was necessary to ensure fairness and accountability. Laura said it was unnecessary and would create administrative burdens. The homeowners in the room disagreed, loudly, and several people stood up and shared their own stories of selective enforcement and arbitrary fines. The vote was 2-0 in favor, with Dean attending remotely and voting yes, and Laura abstaining. The board also voted to adopt a written no retaliation policy that prohibited board members from retaliating against homeowners who filed complaints or exercised their rights under the governing documents, with penalties including removal from the board and personal liability for damages. Laura voted against it but was outvoted 2-1. After the meeting, several homeowners came up to me and thanked me for pushing back. One of them said she was planning to run for the board in the next election because she was tired of Laura running the association like a personal fiefdom. A month later, I closed on the sale of my house. The title company did not find any liens or violations on the property. The buyer did not raise any issues about the HOA. I moved to Spokane and started my new job. I kept in touch with a few neighbors, and they told me Laura resigned from the board 3 months later after a budget review that revealed vendor favoritism, where she had been steering maintenance contracts to a company owned by her brother-in-law and collecting referral fees. The board launched an internal audit, and Laura stepped down before it was finished. Pam became the new board president and implemented additional transparency measures, including publishing meeting minutes and making the architectural guidelines available online for free. I learned a lot from that fight. I learned that HOAs have power, but the power is not unlimited, and they have to follow their own rules. I learned that selective enforcement is the weakest point in any HOA case, because if they let one person do something, they cannot arbitrarily fine another person for the same thing. I learned that documentation is everything, and if you keep good records and stay calm, you can beat even the most aggressive board member. And I learned that a pair of bright orange survey stakes can become the most important props in a property dispute, especially when they keep disappearing and you keep replacing them, and eventually you have photos proving someone is pulling them out in the middle of the night. If you ever find yourself in an HOA fight, here is my advice. Read your governing documents. Keep every email and letter. Take photos of everything, and do not back down when you know you are right. The board is counting on you to give up because fighting is exhausting and expensive. But if you have the evidence and you are willing to stand your ground, they will fold, because the last thing they want is a lawsuit that exposes their tactics to the rest of the neighborhood. And if you can turn the other homeowners into your allies by showing them the truth, the board loses its power and the whole system changes. I appreciated you coming back.